It's time once again to talk about another National Football League championship game before the Super Bowls, and this time we're going to talk about the city of Chicago. Well, that's not anything new, but the team is that we're going to talk about because we have the Chicago Cardinals championship of 1947 coming up, and we have the historian that knows the most about the Cardinals of anybody on the planet. Joe Ziemba comes to join us to tell us about this great year for the Cardinals, and it's coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And we are in our championship series, and boy, are we having a blast. And tonight, we're going to do something different because the four teams that we've talked about quite a bit since the 1933 season, being the Packers and the Bears and the Redskins and the Giants, well, those four teams, none of them are in this championship game. We are going to say that this championship game is for the Birds, and we have two teams that have not played in a championship game thus far. So we have a special historian with us tonight. Our good friend Joe Ziemba is joining us to talk about the 1947 season. Joe, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Darren, thank you as always. And I like the comment about the two Bird teams, which you're absolutely correct. And a couple of teams that had been absent since the playoffs started in the 30s and finally made it. It wasn't easy for either of them.
Yeah, the comment was on the teams, Joe. It wasn't that you're for the Birds, so I just wanted to make that clear.
I would understand if it was. Thank you.
So Joe, what can you tell us about the 1947 season and these two opponents?
Yeah, two really good teams who suffered a lot to get here. Eagles had not been to the playoffs ever, or first time in 15 years. It was really tough. And here we have the Cardinals, who just a few years earlier had lost 29 games in a row, still an NFL record. You throw in a key player for the Cardinals sleeping in a hospital chair before a big game, players describing a field they played on as an ice rink. We have penalties for illegal shoes. And we also have the best two-word description ever for a team winning an NFL championship. So we'll share that tonight, Darren.
Wow, that is a lot to look forward to. And we're always looking forward to your great storytelling and telling us about this great championship year.
Oh, great. Thank you. If you really want to start talking about it, I'm a little bit more knowledgeable about the Cardinals. And so that's why I wanted to share that fact about that 29-game losing streak. This was a team that seemed to be doomed. In 1939, they finished 1-10, and under Coach Ernie Nevers, we had player revolts, players quitting the NFL. And one day, 5 halfbacks left the team in training camp. So Ernie retired from pro coaching after that season, and Jimmy Councilman was brought in, the college coach from Washington University in St. Louis. And Jimmy was with the team for 3 years. The war broke out. The Cardinals, like the Eagles, lost a lot of players to the military service. So when Jimmy left, things really went downhill for the Cardinals. That's when they lost the 29 straight games. They even merged in 1944 with the Steelers, the Card Pits. The team said it was so bad, the Chicago Tribune wrote about them. They're not the Card Pits, they're the carpets, because people walk all over them. We had back-to-back 0-10 seasons for the Cardinals to help solidify that. I guess that reputation is the worst team in pro football for a while. So with 29 straight losses, we still had the same owner, which was Charles Bidwell. And by the end of World War II, players were returning. Councilman came back in 1946. They had great draft choices, including the first bonus baby of the NFL, Charlie Trippi, the halfback from the University of Georgia. And Bidwell chased Trippi all over the country, finally signed him in New York for a reported $100,000 over 4 years. And this is when rookies were still getting $110 a game. So it was pretty spectacular for Charlie Trippi to get that kind of money. It did help because he was the fourth member of the dream backfield for the Cardinals going into the 1947 season. And by dream backfield, we mean this is the first time that an NFL team actually had four All-Americans in the same backfield. That'd be Charlie Trippi from Georgia, Pat Harter from Wisconsin, Marshall Goldberg from Pittsburgh, and Pat, did I mention Pat Harter? Harter, Chrisman. Why am I drawing a blank here? I'm supposed to know this stuff. So they had four guys in the backfield.
Was it Ollie Matson at that time?
Ali was too early. So I had
Too early.
Trippi,
Okay.
Goldberg, Chrisman, and Harder. Okay, I guess I
Okay.
didn't get him.
Okay.
Paul Chrisman from Missouri. I apologize to all the Cardinals fans out there who now know I really know nothing about pro football history. So Bidwell put this team together in 1947, which the team finally had a winning season in 46, and it looked like perhaps this was going to be the year for them finally. They started out with a great exhibition season where Charlie Trippi was unleashed, and then went into the regular season. Eventually, they finished 9-3. And the Eagles that year were 8-4, but had to beat Pittsburgh in order to make the NFL championship game. But it was a tough year for the Cardinals. Not only did they lose their owner, Charles Bidwell, but after a game in Los Angeles where the team took a 4-day train ride to play the Rams, their punter, Jeff Burkett, suffered an appendicitis attack and was forced to stay for a couple of days in a Los Angeles hospital. And he elected, or they wanted him to fly back instead of riding the train all that time with the fresh stitches. And unfortunately, the plane was lost in Utah. So Burkett, they thought, would be one of the leading punters. And he was at the time, might have been one of the leading punters of all time, playing for the Cardinals till he was lost. So going through the season, the Cardinals, again, as I mentioned, from 29 straight losses, were coming back. Seemed to have everything going their way until midseason. They lost a couple of games in a row. Suddenly, the Chicago Bears, the perennial favorites in the National Football League, as you mentioned earlier, those four championships already in the 1940s had tied them in the standings, which left in the last game of the season, would have been December 14th. The Cardinals and the Bears played in what we truly would remember as a truly spectacular game, with a truly extraordinary beginning. The problem was Jimmy Councilman, who was back coaching the Cardinals then, thought they could beat the Bears with sort of a trick play. He would take Babe Dementia, a Purdue halfback, and when they scouted the Bears, noticed that one of the linebackers for the Bears would pick up some of the receivers, who was much slower than the receivers. So he drew up this fantastic play. He said, if we get the ball first, no matter where we are in the field, we're going to throw a pass to Dementia, who was probably the fastest player in the Cardinals, and no one, absolutely no one on the Bears would be able to catch him if they could get the ball first, if they had good field position, and if Babe had time to practice this play in practice. Well, the story goes, it's kind of well known in the Cardinals' annals, was Babe's wife was expecting a baby that week. And so on Tuesday, when they wanted to practice the play, Babe was nowhere to be found. On Wednesday, Babe didn't make it to practice, nor on Thursday. And Councilman finally got a hold of him in the hospital and said, Babe, boy, this is really important what you're doing, but this game kind of has some importance to us as well. How's it look over there without putting pressure? And Babe said, Coach, I'll be there as soon as I can. Well, meanwhile, the key guy in this key play, which could mean the NFL championship for the Cardinals, was sleeping in the hospital chair next to his wife every night. The baby was finally born late in the week. Babe did not have time to practice with the team, but they went over it on a chalkboard, lined it up against the Bears, and sure enough, starting on their own 20, Paul Chrisman faded back, nailed Babe with a great pass, the zoom past all the defenders. The Cardinals led 7-0 and eventually won the game 30-21 on December 14th. So the Cardinals won their first Western Division title. They were going to play the Eastern Division winners, but the Eagles and the Steelers were knotted. They had to play then on the 21st of December, 1947, with the Eagles winning 28-14. The Eagles had a great team, both in the air and on the ground. At quarterback, Tommy Thompson would end up setting a record in the NFL title game. Steve Van Buren, a Hall of Famer, just also was one of the leading rushers, if not the leading rusher, in the National Football League. They had some really tough linemen like Bucko Kilroy, who's, I think, a predecessor to Dick Butkus. There was rumors that Bucko liked to bite teeth in the pile in the huddle underneath when the tackle was made. So as mentioned, the Eagles ended up 8-4 and beat the Steelers to qualify. Cardinals had the home field advantage. And at this point, I should probably say, did I miss anything, Darren? Is there anything you wanted to ask about the season thus far?
Well, I just wanted to make a point of this because we had the three teams that merged during World War II that really weren't very good. I think the Steagles in 43 were 5-4, and you just described, a few minutes ago about the Cart Pits, not very good teams. But these three teams that were struggling so much during the war really rebounded within 3 or 4 years to they're all playing in the postseason, and there really isn't a postseason except for the championship game at that time.
Yes,
So,
yes.
with the Eagles and the Steelers playing for the East in a play-in game, I guess, and of course, the Cardinals playing in a championship against the Eagles. So that's kind of an amazing turnaround and how much the war changed football. I mean, not just it changed it dynamically across the board and it changed it forever, but it also brought these players and trained players while people were over there in their military training and on bases to make them better athletes and made the NFL better, and the bottom dwellers rose to the top. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic.
They did. That whole decade was quite interesting. And I use that example of the Card Pits. And as you mentioned, how they both bounced back and became contending teams as well as the Eagles. So it was quite a unique decade for the NFL. And when these teams got back together, and it was a coaching challenge as well. I remember George Halas saying something about he had the same players, a lot of the same players in 1946, for example, that he had earlier. And how do you coach these guys? They've been shot at, they've blown up ships, they've been in battle, they have the worst possible conditions. And Hallis, who was a pretty strict disciplinarian, decided to get rid of all rules. That did not stick in the NFL, as you know, because coaches have gone back to being pretty strict. But yeah, the way things played both on and off the field for the NFL was pretty remarkable then after the war.
Yeah, and it was also kind of neat. We have a good friend of the podcast, Steve Massey, wrote a book on the 47 Steelers because it's the only time the Steelers made the playoffs until the or 70s when they played
Yeah.
had the Immaculate Reception game. That was the next playoff game that they were ever in. But Steve, brought up a point that they were coached by Jock Sutherland at the time, who was a famous University of Pittsburgh
Yes.
coach before that. And they were still running the single wing, where most of the teams, both in college and the pros, had changed over to the T formation because of the success that the Bears had had,
Yes.
earlier in the decade. So it's an amazing thing that you got this dynamic of these two offenses that are different from each other, different personnel, and people are really trying to learn the game and starting to strategize the game more than they ever had before, which is takes us, springboards us right into the modern times.
It does. The T formation was so amazing, and how different teams at both levels, as you mentioned, tried to, I guess, absorb it and become experts at it. With Clark Shaughnessy, of course, who worked for the Bears and went out to the West Coast to coach, and that's a guy that deserves a lot more credit in football, Clark Shaughnessy. But yeah,
Absolutely.
that T formation and then the Bears, what they did with it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, most definitely. Okay, so so we have a great season. The NFL executives got to be, pawing their hands and really excited because now they've got more teams involved than ever before. It's helping the league to grow, getting these other markets that were sort of downtrodden in years past. Now they're excited about pro football, and they got a great championship game lined up. So what can you tell us from there?
Well, it looked like it would be an incredible game. Maybe the Eagles passing game against the Cardinals rushing game with the dream backfield of the Cardinals. And I should mention that during the season, Marshall Goldberg, he moved more specifically to defense, and Elmer Angsman, a native of Chicago who went to Mount Carmel High School and then went to Notre Dame, was really fast. And in this championship game, it looked like Jimmy Countsman was a genius for having Angsman in the game. So the Eagles had that short week of practice. The Cardinals had 2 full weeks to prepare. Councilman gave them a couple of days off, made them practice on Christmas Day. There's a lot of moaning and groaning about that, but that was life in pro football. The players were all grateful to be there. The season started out pretty well before that mid-season couple of game losing streak. Marshall Goldberg, who we mentioned, had already said he was going to retire after the season. They had a Marshall Goldberg Day. And he said, yeah, he'd already gotten a great job off the field, and he didn't want to hurt that job by continuing to play football. And he had been around the league since, I think, 1939 or so. So at that time, that was a long time for pro football. And Goldberg even was in the military for a couple of years. So all these guys gave so much during World War II, as we just talked about how impact it had on the league itself, but also on some of the players. But they came back. And one thing about the Cardinals that everyone saw the dream backfield, but they had a fantastic line as well. And this is back in the days when guys went both ways. But some of the big names on the line were Chet Bulger, one of my favorites, a big tackle. Bulger was a funny guy, and he had told many stories about his time with the Cardinals. For example, he said he got in shape by going to the park and kicking the football and running after it, because back then we didn't have year-round training. We had to get jobs. These guys, except Charlie Trippi, needed some money. So I can see old Bulger, 260 pounds of him, kicking the ball, running after it. And he said he didn't overdo it. He walked back before he kicked it again. He also listened to Jimmy Councilman, who said he was too light for a tackle in the NFL. And he said, well, coach, what can I do about that? And Councilman said, well, I want you to go home this summer and eat a lot of steak and drink a lot of beer. And Bulger said, I'll be glad to do that, coach. And he did. So Bulger, one of my favorites. And at the ends, we had Billy Dool and Mel Kuttner. Billy Dool's a 6'4" guy back in 1940s. That was pretty tall. Also played minor league baseball. Joe Parker and Frank Ivy were another couple of receivers. Stan Malden, only weighing 250 pounds, but would have been probably a perennial All-Pro if he gained a little weight, which he did. And unfortunately, he passed away in the locker room the next season. But Bulger and Malden were two great tackles. The guards were Buster Ramsey, who was, from his teammates, is probably too talkative, but they thought also that he was probably the one guy who wasn't in the Hall of Fame way back when that he should be today, but that hasn't happened. So, but before the game, Councilman was talking, and everybody thought this would be a toss-up. We had the passing game against the ground game of the Cardinals, but also, as I mentioned, Steve Van Buren, who was such an excellent runner. And Councilman even said that Greasy Neal has a fine team, Greasy Neal being the coach of the Eagles. And by the way, Darren, you may not know this, but a recent book came out about the early days of coaching with Greasy Neal. You should pick it up. It's wonderfully written. The author has been compared to people like Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald. But if you want to learn about Greasy's early days, pick that book up.
Yeah, I think the author maybe can clean the shoes of those guys, maybe on a good day. Thank
They're
you.
all good looking guys. I know that. So Councilman feared the Philadelphia line. He said it's a lot stronger than most people think. And another thing going for the Cardinals, in one exhibition game and a regular season game, they'd already beaten Eagles twice that season. And now they're going to be at their home field at Comiskey Park in Chicago. Unfortunately, Chicago in the winter is a little cold. The field was kind of frozen. Vince Benotis, another lineman or the center, said that the field was hard as ice. And so Councilman told his players to wear gym shoes during the game to see if they could get better traction. And it wasn't below zero like we've seen sometimes in Green Bay, but it was very cold. And like I said, Councilman had that foresight to have the players wear gym shoes or sneakers, as you want to call them. And Benonis said that really helped, that they were able to give us a lot of traction. And Chet Bulger, I remember saying something like, it was so bitterly cold with the wind, but if you play in Chicago that late in the year, that's certainly going to happen. He also had a funny story he told about the NFL didn't have a lot of money back then compared to today, that they got one jersey at the beginning of the season. And wool jersey was hot as heck during those early games in September. But by the time the end of December they were playing, it fit just fine and kind of kept them warm. So they expected a fairly decent crowd for this game, but only about 30,000 showed up. Comiskey Park crew did a great job of covering the field with hay and a tarp before, but it was still cold. In fact, the Eagles end, Jack Ferrani, said that Comiskey was like a skating rink. He hadn't seen anything like it before, but we had taken the weather into account as we got ready in the pregame. We had on regular football shoes, but the cleats were filed pretty sharp and to a point. That gave us the traction we needed, and I thought they'd work much better than the tennis shoes the Cardinals were wearing. Problem was that there was a game that was almost decided before it started because in the Eagles locker room, the ball boys for the Cardinals noticed they were filing down these cleats to a point, should have been flat, and it would give them better traction. They told Councilman about it, and he waited till the game got started. So here we are, a couple minutes in the game. Eagles are starting a drive, and all of a sudden, Councilman asked the ref to check the shoes on the Eagles. Particularly, I think it was Tommy Thompson, the quarterback. Sure enough, the Eagles were penalized for improper equipment and stopped the drive. And even till the end of the game, Greasy Nail was just hostile and livid about this decision that it cost his team a bit of a drive. So the Cardinals, meanwhile, had their gym shoes on, and even the Green Bay Gazette got a look at the shoes and said they had filed their cleats down to razor sharpness. So 2 penalties were given out for illegal equipment, but it didn't make much sense because when the Eagles put on their gym shoes, maybe they weren't as good as the Cardinals. One of the newspapers said it was like 22 drunk guys on an ice skating rink, stumbling around each other, trying to get something done. But the Cardinals were also obsessed a bit with the 8-man line of the Eagles that day. And I've looked at film, and I know a couple other guys who are coaches have looked at that, and we're not sure it really was an 8-man line. But the plan was for the Cardinals to attack it in one spot, spread the linemen apart, let a back run through, and there wasn't going to be much opposition in the backfield. So the Eagles apparently were planning on the Cardinals not passing too much. But George Halas said something about the 8-man line before the game. He said, bah, all you got to do is pinch a back through there, and he's practically alone in the clear. And that's exactly what happened. About 6 minutes in the game, Charlie Trippi, who we mentioned, burst through the line, and he was gone. Vince Benotis did a lot of the blocking, but Trippi scored there. And so alternative there was for Thompson to start throwing the ball because Steve Van Buren wasn't having much luck on the ground. But then a little later, Elmer Angsman went through the same way Charlie Trippi did and went 70 yards for a score. Pat Harder kicked the extra point and suddenly was 14-0 with 6 minutes left in the half. Well, in the the second quarter, then Thompson finally found his end, McHugh, for a 53-yard touchdown. It was 14-7 at the half. Still anybody's game here in Chicago in the frozen field. But in the third quarter, Charlie Trippi received a punt at his own 25, and he didn't really have any blockers. But with 3 Eagles in front of him, some of the stories were great. That Trippi moved to his left. He fell down once, evaded the 3 defenders, went back, fell down again, and went 75 yards into the end zone. And was supposedly said that Greasy Nail was yelling to his players. They said, hey, get up, wait, get ready. He's going to be coming around this way again sometime. So Trippi did one of the most magical punt returns in Cardinals history. So it's 21-7, Darren. Then in the third period, Van Buren finally came in from the 1. We have a game, 21-14 at the end of the third quarter. And I apologize, is there anything maybe you wanted to mention here before I go into that?
No, you got us on the edge of our seats. Please continue. This is a good game.
So 21-14 Cardinals. What's going to happen next? Well, Elmer Angsman went through the middle again for another 70-yard score. It was 28-14. And these 2 long runs gave Angsman an NFL record for a title game. He broke the record. I think it's still a record, Darren. 159 yards and 10 carries to shatter the previous mark. So quite a day for Elmer Angsman. And that led to the Eagles not being able to score again. Van Buren was limited to 26 yards on 18 rushing attempts. However, Tommy Thompson had a wonderful game. breaking the NFL record. He completed 27 of 44 passes for 297 yards, breaking Sammy Baugh's 1937 championship game records. Paul Chrisman for the Cardinals was relying on his offensive running. He only completed 3 of 14 for 54 yards, but he wasn't upset after the game. He just said, I don't care how I did as long as we won. So they asked Councilman after the game, did you bring up the fact that Charles Bidwell had passed away and Jeff Burkett as some kind of incentive? And he said, nope. He said, these boys were pretty grim without me trying to make them go out on a maudlin note. However, Greasy Neal was still fired up after the game. He said it wouldn't show up in the final score. This is referring back to those early penalties. But the start of the game, we were penalized 5 yards for illegal equipment when we could have made a first down, and that cost us plenty. So the Cardinals won 28-21. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's the last championship for the franchise. Now we're going to be going on. It's 47, that's 78 years, the longest drought between championships for any type of franchise, hockey, football, baseball, etc. We're still waiting to see if maybe the Cardinals will break that drought this year, but for at least 1 year, they were the champions. And I mentioned at the beginning, it brought on the most wonderful 2-word description of the title. And this is from Phil Benningsen, who was serving as the kind of the president of the team. Violet Bidwell, the wife of Charles, was still running the team. Benningsen was running the team. And afterwards, they said to him, Mr. Benningsen, how do you feel about this win? He said, I'll tell you in 2 words, wonderful. So you got to think about that, Darren. That's how the Cardinals stole the hearts of Chicago, at least for 1 season, and frozen Comiskey Park.
Wow, well said. Well, great story, great championship game. Now, I like to bring up something because sort of it's not his final year, but Jimmy Conzelman has been a part of the National Football League from the beginning.
Yes.
And he has been in so many big games on different teams, and this is sort of his last eye in the spotlight, even though he's in the
Yeah.
1948 season with the Cardinals as their coach. But going all the way back to the Decatur Staleys, he's playing on that team. He's coaching and playing. He's coaches the Providence Steamroller to a championship in the 20s. This is his other championship with the Cardinals, and he's in and out. Owns his own team, and is in and out through National Football League every year. He's a story to be told in this game, and I think it's a great career and needs to be admired. And this is probably a great time to do it because he's going out on top basically. So this is kind of a neat
Oh,
thing.
he was so good, and the players just love Coach Councilman. They called him a blur of activity, chain smoking. He drank Coca-Cola by the bottle and would have Coca-Cola sitting by. But as you mentioned, starting out as a quarterback for the Decatur Staleys back in 1920, he, of course, was on the Great Lakes football team in 1918, which with George Hallis and Patty Driscoll, and won the Rose Bowl. And then moving on to his playing career with Rock Island, where he found out in the middle of a huddle he was named the head coach while still in his 20s. They fired the coach in the middle of a huddle. And so Councilman took over, eventually moved over to Providence, owned Detroit for a while, thought he had it made with the Red Grange tour, and Red couldn't play. And Jimmy drove up to the park that day, and he said he saw this line of people waiting to buy tickets, he thought. He said, we finally made it, till he found out that they were there for the refund because Red Grange couldn't play against them that day. But won the championship in 28 with Providence, as you mentioned, and then went into college coaching very successfully. Won 3 or 4 or 5 Missouri Valley Conference championships with Washington. And Washington is not looked upon as a big school, but they at that time were considered a major college in terms of football, playing a lot of the big schools we know as major Division I teams. So when he came back, it was great. The Cardinals had high hopes. No one anticipated the war would decimate all the teams and decimate really the country and the way we did things. And he came back triumphantly, looked like a genius, turning around those years of losses in 1946, winning it all in 47. And then in 48, which you'll find out about next, was what I consider the finest Cardinals team. They were 11-1, and they were rattling everybody. And I won't tell the secret of how that season ended because you'll hear it soon in 1948. But I thought that was the finest Cardinal team. And after that, Jimmy decided to get out of pro football, went into an advertising job, and said he was kind of tired. He had a teenage boy at the time and wanted to be closer to his home in St. Louis, is what he did. But as you mentioned, what a guy. I mean, what an encyclopedia of the NFL for those first 3 decades was Jimmy Councilman.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I know from my research on the book we're doing right now on the 1925 season, when you talked about the Detroit Wolverines that he owned, it got to the end of the season and Detroit was in contention for that National Football League championship, and they were supposed to play Pottsville on a weekend. Joe Carr, the president of the NFL at the time, wanted Pottsville and the Cardinals to play.
Ah,
And so he ended up telling them, they didn't want Pottsville and Detroit to play and Pottsville to lose. They wouldn't get the gate for the Cardinals game. They're supposed to play back-to-back days. So they
oh,
canceled the game with Detroit. But that could have been Detroit's opportunity. If Detroit wins that, beats
yeah,
Pottsville, they are right in neck and neck with the Cardinals for the best record in the National
yeah,
Football League, and probably would have been forced to play each other there in the last 2 weeks of the season for that. So got some bad breaks, from the commander in chief of the league, but
mhm.
that could have been a different outcome for him. Could have been 3 championships. Who knows?
And it's kind of amazing too when you look back at the 20s, how these teams had to rely on train travel. And Akron in the early 20s played a game on Saturday, then came all the way to Chicago to play the Bears in what they thought was an exhibition. Um, what crazy scheduling, crazy misunderstandings on a lot of different things as well. But how much time they spent on trains back then. If you
Yeah.
talk about someone today and said, "Oh yeah, the Cardinals would go to Los Angeles on a train for 4 days," what?
Yeah, right, right. Definitely a great era and great story, Joe. And we really appreciate you using your knowledge and everything to tell us that. Do you have any projects coming up on the podcast or anything you want to talk about that for your listeners and your fans to look forward to?
Yeah, next podcast, I've been off for a while, will be on the 1899 rules. When you think of football, what were the rules like when the Cardinals first started in 1899? They're pretty bizarre, Darren, and kind of a fun thing to look at. I'm still working on a couple books coming out this year. One will be the next revision of my book, When Football Was Football, coming out, I would think, in the next couple of months. And then hopefully later in the year, early next year, my biography of a very special person is called Mats Tonelli, uh, from the NFL to Baton and back, and his historic journey of a guy who volunteered to go serve in World War II when he didn't really have to at the time, and was a Japanese prisoner for the entire World War II until he came back. So pretty inspirational stuff. I'm just amazed when I find out things that people said about him then and the things he went through. So those are kind of the fun things. Got some speaking engagements. For anyone who's interested in pro football history, you might want to think about attending the Pro Football Researchers Association convention this summer in Minneapolis. And I'll be talking about the 1925 Red Grange tour, but behind the scenes from a viewpoint of the owner, who was the co-owner, Dutch Sterneman, along with George Hallis, and funny things about how players didn't always get paid, some little fistfights among the players, what they had to do when the hosting guy ran out of money. So this is stuff that was based on the Sterneman papers, which are now at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which just gives us a really good idea of what the costs and expenses were for playing pro football way back 100 years ago. So I hope it'll be fun. But that'll be this summer in Minneapolis, the PFRA convention.
Well, are you going to be able to sleep at all the next few months? Because you're a pretty busy guy here.
Yeah, it might be. What I'm going to probably do is start reading one of my own books, and that'll put me to sleep rather rapidly.
Joe, we are really looking forward. We're excited that you're getting back on, you're getting the podcast fired up again, and you got your typewriter going, and you got the books coming out, and the reincarnation of your great classic that you had from a couple decades ago, with
Yeah,
some new
hard to
information
believe.
on it. We're excited about that, and the Mozzanelli story, a story that needs to be told. And we know that's a great, passionate story that you are a great right person to tell.
No, thank you.
So. Well, we appreciate you coming on, Joe, and being a part of this championship series. This is your second stint with us and telling this story. You started us off in 33, and now you're up
Oh,
to 47 with the Cardinals, and we really appreciate you coming on and preserving the football history with us.
oh, thank you, Darren, as always, for this opportunity. It's wonderful talking to you and learn from you every time we chat. So thank you. Best of luck with your book on the 1925 season. It's like the other ones. I know it'll be superlative, and I'll be first in line to pick one up. So again, thank you for allowing me to be on the program tonight.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.